Morning, guys. Happy Thursday, March 26th. Before I start this day in history, I wanted to bring in my sponsor for the day, Lysol Wipes. They kill 99.9% of all bacteria and viruses. You need us now more than ever. So, on March 26th, 1804, President Thomas Jefferson and Congress are going to get together and they are going to make a decision to ask all Native Americans to leave the land that is east of the Mississippi River and take up their homestead in the state of, or in the territory of, Louisiana. And the reason why they wanted to do this is they wanted to free up land for white settlers that were actually demanding more and more and more land. This turned out to be a huge failure because some tribes decided they would participate willingly and others decided that they just didn't want to do it totally. So that happened, and about 20 years later is when Andrew Jackson decides he's going to forcibly remove all of the Native Americans in something called the Indian Removal Act, and we also called it the Trail of Tears, which we talked about in class. That actually caused the reservation system for Native Americans. So I wanted to speak to you really briefly about this, March 25th. That was yesterday. And I want to bring your attention to this right here at the top. It says responses 81. I have 115 of you. So that means that many of you did not turn this in. So I'm going to give you another chance. Go back to March 25th. Fill this out. It's very easy. You put your first name, your last name, your period, and then you answer a couple questions, and boom, you're done. So please take the time to go back and take a look at that. So today you're watching your video update, you're checking in, or you're going to check this off. And I have here, if you did not finish the segregation and discrimination slide in notes, you probably should take a look at that. These are the slides that I'm talking about again, and we kind of went through this a little bit yesterday. This is all material that we already went over in class. We talked about Ben Tillman. We talked about the platform that he ran. We talked about how all of these things kind of happened, and that election was actually kind of rigged. So again, these are all things that you could go through. Again, just kind of review, take some brief notes on them, and everything should be fine for your test or your quiz that you will have on tomorrow, Friday. The next thing I have down there is the reconstruction packet. So this reconstruction packet, we went over it a little bit yesterday, and I went over some of the answers. We actually ended right here, and I ended you with this little tease right here of the timeline of Reconstruction era. But here's the actual timeline itself. So you have Abraham Lincoln that's going to be assassinated between 1865 and 1866. The 13th Amendment is going to be ratified, which you all know what the 13th Amendment did. You have the Reconstruction Act is going to be passed. And then you move into President Johnson is going to be impeached. And we talked about why he was impeached, because he just did not have a good relationship with those radical Republicans. You had the 14th Amendment was ratified. Ulysses S. Grant is going to be elected as the president, and he was a former general for what side, Confederate or Union? Question of the day. And the 15th Amendment is going to be ratified, and then you kind of take a look all the way down into the Freedmen's Bureau, the Civil Rights Act of 1875. Rutherford B. Hayes is going to be elected as the president in 1876. And finally, Reconstruction is going to end in the year 1877. So it talks about why the Reconstruction came to an end, and it basically came to an end because of the election of 1876. It was disputed. The Republicans were going to control and manipulate the results, which the Democrats could actually prove. So it was basically a corrupt bargaining tactic, and they basically just kind of said, okay, we'll let you win if you do this. So it was a very interesting time period. It was a very corrupt time period as well that was going on in U.S. history during this Reconstruction era. The concepts, the key concepts on the next page, Lincoln, his plan, he wanted for his Reconstruction plan, remember, it was the 10% plan. And the 10% plan is he wanted 10% of the state's voters to pledge their loyalty to the U.S. And again, we talked about that in class. Was it too low? Was it really that difficult to get 10% of your population to agree? And that's why you ended up having Wade Davis. And he was drafted by the Radical Republicans, or was drafted by the Radical Republicans in 1864. And it's basically going to add protection with Union soldiers across the South. He wanted 50% of the voters to take an oath of allegiance. And that was passed by both houses of Congress. But President Lincoln decided he was going to veto that. You had Johnson's plan, which was to call for state conventions to basically repeal the whole secession entirely. And eventually he's going to allow the southern states to rejoin the Union. But he is going to be impeached because he ended up fighting with those radical Republicans, or the Republicans who thought he was just way too lenient. The next little blurb is about the 13th Amendment, and you guys answered that in your gallery walk. And here's just a little bit more about the 13th Amendment. The 14th Amendment basically said anyone born in the United States is a citizen of America and is going to possess the rights and the privileges of being a citizen of the country. What was the purpose of this amendment? It basically granted citizenship for all former enslaved people. And then the impact that it had on history is, it basically helped the idea of the civil rights movement to actually begin. So that was a very important amendment. The 15th Amendment is going to guarantee the rights of all African Americans, the right to vote. So again, we talked about this the other day. All men now are able to vote. It doesn't matter if you're white or black. If you own land or you don't own land, you are now permitted to vote if you are a man. Women, you're not going to be able to, or girls, you're not going to get a chance to vote yet for about another 50 years, and that was called the women's suffrage movement, and we'll talk about that in the weeks coming up. Plessy versus Ferguson, and I ask you to basically what did Plessy versus Ferguson establish, or can they establish in the United States? And it basically established the rights to basically the principle of separate but equal segregation of the races in the United States. And then it kind of goes down and asks you some more questions about it. Again, you guys can read all of this as we go through. You can stop it. You can add these notes into your own notes if that's something that you need to do. Comparing the South during the South after Reconstruction. So during this time period, African Americans were elected to the local and statewide offices. The Union Army has had their presence in the area to basically protect and deal with the civil rights. And after you had Jim Crow, the Jim Crow era of segregation, which was enforced by the state. No African Americans could be political leaders. The sharecropping system is going to return, and we talked about the sharecropping system. Was it good? In a way, it was. Was it bad? Yeah, in a way, it was. It was kind of like slavery all over again. With just a few little bits of freedom that they kind of added in, but it still was kind of a form of slavery. Both of these things, it basically devastated the economy, and it struggled to rebuild. And it was dominated by agriculture, both large farms and small farms. The visual literacy, I basically ask you just to kind of take a look at these little cartoons, these political cartoons, and just kind of analyze them. So again, these things are something that you should be able to take a look at. And some of these pictures you should have recognized from the DBQ. And I'm looking at this one in particular right here. And it talks about in 1874, Harper's Magazine, the cartoon denounces the KKK and the White League, the murdering of innocent African Americans. And then it said, how did the KKK use terrorism to attempt to achieve their goals? And we talked all about that in class prior to our break. We talked about how they ended up burning people's houses down, and it was all a big scare and intimidation factor. And a lot of the African Americans during that time period were very easily scared because they just came out of slavery. So it wouldn't be that surprising that they would be very upset about what was happening to them during this time period. The 15th Amendment, again, it just kind of shows you a little political cartoon and just asks you to kind of write some stuff down. I talked to you about carpetbaggers, and that was basically a derogatory term by any former Confederate, towards any sort of former Confederates, and a person from the North who came down to the South after the Civil War. So take a look at these again and just kind of look through the political cartoon, look at the question, and answer it. It should not be that difficult. It might be a little time consuming for you because you just have to definitely just kind of take a look at it and think about some of these cartoons, but it shouldn't be terribly difficult for you to kind of get it finished. After that, I wanted to share with you, we have the information for your test or your quiz. And I have included that right down here. And it says review for the quest. And it talks about the reasons for the Freedmen Bureau, the 13th and 15th Amendment, sharecropping, President Lincoln and his Reconstruction Plan, scallywags, carpetbaggers, the South Carolina Constitution of 1865, the Wade Hampton and Bill Tillman idea, the Hamburg Massacre, which I believe you read about yesterday. And if not, you definitely looked at it in this review packet that I gave you. The Jim Crow laws and the presidential and congressional basically plans for Reconstruction. Plessy versus Ferguson and something called the 8 Box Law. And if you look down here, right in through here, look what I gave you. I gave you a study guide that some of you asked for. And I finally decided I was going to put one together for you because we haven't been together in basically 2 weeks, almost 2 weeks now. So I gave you the study guide, and if you look at that word right here, what does that say? It says K-E-Y, key. So if you read that, that basically gives you all the answers for tomorrow's quest. So, you know how I like to say thank you and you're welcome, but there you go. Thank you and you're welcome. So, there it is all in today. I mean, that's all we have to take a look at. You needed to watch this video, which I'm sorry that you had to actually give up, 12 minutes of your life to watch this video, but you did, and you passed. So great. Mark it complete. You looked at the PowerPoint from yesterday. We did a quick look at that Reconstruction era packet that was online. I gave you some terms, things that you needed to review for your test. And I also gave you this little handy dandy thing down here, the key for the study guide. So with that being said, I wanted to let you know there are still some of you that have not turned in that DBQ, and you need to get that turned in to us or to me as soon as possible. The quarter actually ended yesterday, which was March 25th. However, since I already have that on the grade books, the DBQ, I am going to count it for third quarter. And I will be entering your grades in there slowly but surely as I'm going through them. I'm probably about halfway through right now, so you should be getting your grades probably within a few hours after seeing this video. At least probably about 50 to 60% of you should get that. By the end of the day, probably 100% of you should have your actual DBQ grade, so you should actually know what your quarter grade is. Please continue to take a look at your grades. If there's something that you turned in, look to make sure it's put in the right spot, because I've been looking through a lot of things as I'm trying to get these grades submitted, and I'm seeing a lot of things in crazy spots. So if you could, please take the time, review your stuff, make sure you're putting everything in the correct place. And it's not just in my class, it's in all of our classes. Some of you are not putting things in the correct spot, and that is causing not only a problem for me, but it's also causing a problem for you, because I have to spend all this time looking for your grades, or looking for papers, and then I have to find them, and then I have to import them again inside of the grade book after I've already given you that dreaded 0. So please make sure you're putting things in the right spot. Just take a little extra time and just make sure that everything goes in the exact spot that it should be. So with that, I'm going to sign off for today. I hope you have a beautiful day. The sun should be shining again. It should be 80 degrees. Again, Lysol wipes and hand sanitizer. Those are your friends. Be good, guys, and stay safe. We'll see you tomorrow.